Right, we're going to be talking about storytelling for impact. And there's one big question that we face all the time when we are talking to people about storytelling in your space. And we spend about half of our time working with charities and not-for-profits and foundations, and the other half of our time working with all kinds of clients. But in your space, one of the most important questions that we grapple with is, why is it that the most important stories, the ones that we should all really hear, understand, be engaged with, are the ones that struggle to be heard? And obviously that's a challenge that you guys are grappling with every single day. The reality is that stories are fundamental to who we are. So I don't know how many of you have kids on the call, but you'll know that as early as kids can speak, they start telling stories. It's how we all make sense of the world around us. It's how we constantly structure our lives, telling stories, understanding stories. It is literally how we exist in the world. Our organisation, LookUP, helps organisations grow through the power of story. Matthew and myself, so Matthew's not with me today, my co-founder, we have backgrounds that span agency and media owner and clients. And as I said, we spend most of our time working with either clients in the not-for-profit world, and then the other half, everyone from agencies to media owners to up-and-coming brands. And we're constantly working through stories with people in three different ways. So whether it's their future story, how they're setting their vision, how they're setting their North Star and stripping everything else away in the name of that future, their culture story, how they're bringing teams together, because our cultures are made up of the stories that we tell each other in the day-to-day, or what we call their selling story, how they're taking that message to market, how they are convincing external audiences of what they're trying to do. Obviously something that's incredibly relevant for you guys. Just to bring that to life slightly, one of the organisations that we work with that you may well have heard of is the Alzheimer's Society. So we helped them develop their story, their new brand, and take that to market. We've trained lots of their organisation in how to be better storytellers, in the understanding that particularly in charities and not-for-profits, actually everyone in the organisation needs to be a storyteller, because we're constantly telling the story of what we do and we're engaging people in different ways, even if we work in a team like finance, for example. And we also helped them pitch for a big Amaze partnership. So we do very commercial storytelling too. We are in the age of the big squeeze, and we feel that stories are the way that we survive. So when we talk about the big squeeze, we're talking about the fact that our funding is falling. There is an increase in operating costs, and there's an increase in demand for all of our services. So all of those things, alongside the fact that we're living in a world that is obviously got so much change going on all the time and just the worst perpetual negative news agenda, it makes it very difficult to cut through and do the jobs that we need to do. And storytelling, we believe, is going to be the hard skill that enables us to survive. We see three main challenges in your space. The first is that immersive bad news. There is no escape at the moment in the news agenda from the horrors of the world, whether that be Gaza, whether that be wars in other countries, whether that be declining gender equity. The list is endless. And what that means is it's very hard to cut through with our cause now. It feels like a much more competitive space in cause-related marketing than we've ever seen. The second is that means that there is this rising tide of apathy. People feel like they can't make a difference. People feel like taking any action is worthless because who listens? So we need in our storytelling to feel like we're giving people agency. And then finally, there's this new value exchange that people expect. So it's no longer about donating, whether that's time or money. They want to feel part of something. They want to feel like there is a reflection of their action. They want to feel like they've made an impact in some way. So it means that great stories need to create hope. To cut through that negative news agenda, people need to feel like there is hope in the world, like there is something that they can get behind. And sometimes that means hope in quite light-hearted terms. We've got a quick example here that's from PetSmart Charities. And I'll show you the case study and you can make sense of it yourself.
And I'll give you something to believe. OMW.
I get to foster reason.
Good at what I do. I'm OMW. OMW. On my way.
So PetSmart Charities were gearing themselves up to being at their 11 millionth adoption point, which is obviously a big milestone. And to do that, they really wanted to engage people in the emotion behind adopting a pet and drive a huge number of new pet adoptions. So to do that, they use storytelling in a really fun and unique way. They created series on Instagram and on TikTok, and they were immersive and they took on all of the tropes of reality TV. So they were really tongue in cheek, but it meant that they gained a huge number of views behind quite a low budget way to do storytelling because people really felt like there was hopefulness, like there was joy, and it cut through that negative news agenda because they were leaning into it. It's a challenge we often face in your space where do we lean into the negative side of what we're doing and all of the issue, or do we lean into the positive and the solution? Great stories also need to create agency. And I'm sure, even though this is initially a UK example, that you'll be very familiar with Adolescence in the US, given that it was the #1 Netflix show across more than 70 countries when it launched. And it gained 24 million views in the first 3 days it launched in the UK alone. What's interesting about Adolescence is how it made people feel like they had agency in what they did next. So it has to be one of the shortest periods of time between storytelling and a message going to market and actual change happening, because within 2 weeks in the UK, this became part of the national curriculum in schools in health and sex education. It affected legislation in terms of how online environments are controlled and the responsibility of social media platforms. It made people feel like it was personal. It made people feel like they had to act in some way. And that's what we want to do with our storytelling. And then finally, great stories have to create impact. As we said before, people want to feel like they've learned something or they're part of something. There needs to be this value exchange, and impact is the way that we do it. And we have one last example here that we'll just play quickly.
We're choosing not to show the more graphic moments this morning. It started with a traffic stop, though. Officers accused Nichols of driving recklessly.
Officer Geronimo Yanes stopped Philando Castile for a broken taillight.
Why am I being apprehended? You're trying to give me a ticket.
I said get out of the car.
I miss you so much. I miss you so much.
This is the world's first DWB. Equipped with transparent doors to eliminate reasonable suspicion, whatever that means. A 10-2 steering wheel that keeps hands visible at all times. We remove the glove box so there's no confusion about what the driver is reaching for. With a touch of a button, the ultrasonic biometric scanner displays the license and registration of the driver to ensure contactless exchange of information. With no trunk, nothing can be concealed, so therefore, there is nothing to search and seize. And we remove the engine because, honestly, why risk it? DWB, the first vehicle of its kind, where the safety feature is the car itself.
Move on just in the video just for the purposes of time, but what was really important about that example was people felt part of a moment. They felt immersed in the storytelling. So we're going to have a quick exercise and just split you guys into breakout rooms in a second. So hopefully you may have got our communication before the session where we asked you to do a number of things. One of them was to come with, when did a story last move you? It might be a book, it might be a film, it might be an advert that you saw, it might be a story that someone told you. We want you to share that with a partner. I'm going to give you a quick example from me, and it's really worth going off and having a listen to this. Again, it's an English podcast, but I think you will really love it. It's a podcast that's called Strangers on a Bench. And what the guy does is he literally goes and sits and he talks to a different stranger on every week's episode of the podcast. And he ends up having this really in-depth conversation with these strangers about their lives, about their challenges that they face. For some reason, people really trust him and they really become immersed. It's a really great example of the fact that we love humanity in storytelling. We love to hear people's stories, and particularly when we're looking at the not-for-profit space, there is an example of people wanting to feel like the personal layer of the story is there that they can relate to. So we're literally going to do this for a quick minute each because we've got a lot to get through in this session. So Kareem hopefully is going to work his magic when it comes to the technology, and we're going to split you all off into twos quickly, just give you a quick minute each, and then we're going to pull you back in. So hopefully, if anyone's got any really nice examples they heard there, maybe add them to the chat and we'll carry on. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 enemies when it comes to our storytelling and really creating impact with our storytelling. The first is complexity. If there is no North Star to our storytelling, if there is no thread, then everything falls apart. And quite often we all want to say too much all of the time, everywhere at once. Any client that we work with in our storytelling consultancy, it's never an issue that people are saying too little. It's always too much. We want to say everything all of the time. The second is sameness. So not being able to cut through and market, not having a message that clearly stands out to people, not really being clear what you stand for and why. And the final one is overload, remembering that whoever our communications audience is, whether it's internal, whether it's partners, whether it's donors, they all have too much on. You are always entering someone else's story. And actually, how do you find a relevance in their story? How do you find a way to cut through with them? So we're going to teach you, and it is going to be fast-paced and furious because sometimes we do these sessions over a full day, sometimes we do them in half a day. I've done them in half an hour. So we're going to find ways to just tease out some learnings around this and have you fast and furiously have a go at these tools as we go. So we're going to talk to you about jeopardy. So how do you, to have that clear North Star, how do you immediately start with something that your audience cares about that makes them lean in? The second one is sameness. How do you have a clear role? How do you have a character in your storytelling? And the final one is shape. If someone is overloaded and they want to engage with your story, there are recognizable story types and tropes that you can use that enable them to lean in, enable them to really understand and comprehend your story quickly. I'm going to give you a really quick example of that and an entertainment example. And we are very lucky in our storytelling consultancy. We speak to lots of people from storytellers from every industry you can imagine. So everyone from editors to producers to writers to political speech writers, and all of their learnings come into our approach. So you'll see lots of entertainment examples as we go through today. Jaws is a great example of storytelling. So I'm assuming most people on the call probably will have seen Jaws. And if you haven't, then that's your homework for the weekend because it's a culturally significant film. We all should have seen it. If we think about the jeopardy of Jaws, if you haven't seen it for a while, you might be forgiven for thinking that Jaws starts with a shark attack. And actually, Jaws doesn't start with a shark attack. It starts with a small town in America, and it's a bunch of teenagers, and they're having a really lovely time. They're flirting around a fire. And then there is a shark attack. And the reason you care about the story is because you want the teenagers to be okay. You want that lovely picture that you've just seen to remain. The main character in Jaws isn't the shark. The main character is Lieutenant Brody. And the reason that you care about Lieutenant Brody is because he's scared of water. So not only does he have to spend the entire film chasing the biggest shark that we've ever seen, he also has to spend it on a boat. When you think about the structure of Jaws, because you know it's about a shark attack, you obviously could be forgiven for thinking that it's going to end with the shark being caught, and you'd be right. And they need to keep your interest in some way. So they have these clear chapters, these challenges that they resolve that keep you interested as the story progresses. They think they've caught the shark. They haven't actually caught the shark. They open the beaches again. Then there's another shark attack. And then finally, Jaws is a film that was saved in the edit. So Spielberg just wanted to make a film that with a big mechanical shark, as you do. But unfortunately, the mechanical shark was awful. So they had to come up with ways in the edit to make the film work. So they used the iconic doo-dun, doo-dun. They used B-roll of other sharks so that you had a glimpse of the shark and you were made to feel a certain way. But actually, if you were to watch the film again, you see startlingly little of the shark itself. So we're going to bring that to life as we go. We use what is called a storyboard, and we're going to have you guys have a go at writing one of these at quick speed today for your challenge. So as we go through, we sent it in the pre-task, but if you didn't get the pre-task, we want you to think of a particular communications challenge you have for your organisation at the moment. Be really specific about the audience that you need to be communicating to. You know, is it end donors? Is it partners? Is it someone internal? And we're going to take you through each of these stages. So maybe take a quick photo on your phone so you know what we're doing. And we're going to take you through each of these one by one and literally give you kind of 5 minutes to have a go at each part of it. So we're going to take you through that point of jeopardy. How do you lean into your end audience's problem? character building. How do you show the role that you're playing as an organization in the face of that problem? How do you start your stories ending first so they've got a really clear outcome? How do you structure them and use story types and clear chapters? And then how do you edit them so that we understand what to leave in and what to leave out? It's going to be fast paced. We're going to have fun. So our first thing to talk about is the point of jeopardy. We've got a very quick film to show here. For some of you who've seen Barbie, this will seem familiar. For others who haven't, it's one of the best starts of the film to really show jeopardy, because this came along at a time where Barbie and Mattel had been having challenges for years about how to position Barbie in the modern world, because as a toy, as an icon, it was seen as not feminist, not relevant in the current context. And Greta Gerwig was brilliant in how she brought this to life and how she lent into what the audience cared about.
Since the beginning of time, since the first little girl ever existed, there have been dolls. But the dolls were always and forever baby dolls. The girls who played with them could only ever play at being mothers, which can be fun, at least for a while anyway. Ask your mother. This continued until
So whether you've seen that before or not, I mean, I've seen that clip now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times because we run storytelling sessions all of the time. And it still gets me every single time seeing that small child just smashing that doll up. But it's a very clever clip because it immediately leans into the fact that they know the audience is going to have a perception about Barbie. They know that they have to intrigue them in some way. They know they have to subvert expectations. And they do it brilliantly through interesting cultural references that are from Space Odyssey, to understanding that actually the perception of what the doll stands for is against what society really stands for now. And how do they really play into that? And that's what we need to think about, is how we tell our stories. As I said, we're constantly speaking to experts, and this is Dan. Dan is a broadcaster, a podcaster, a writer, also, interestingly, alongside all of that, a really distinct heavy metal and grime fan. But he talks a little bit about how we tell stories and why it's so important how we start them.
So on my wall, I've got a more generalized rule of storytelling. It's called dessert first or a punch in the face. And my go-to technique, no matter what medium I'm working in, telling stories, is instant immersion, instant action, your most exciting bit right at the top of the story. No long, digressive, mysterious openings. Not in my world of storytelling, anyway. It's you're dumped straight into a story that will drag you along with usually sort of exciting action, gory detail, something weird or funny, and questions posed that you need to read on in order to have answered. And so whenever I've not got that in a story, it doesn't work.
So as I said at the beginning, it's recognizing that when you are telling any kind of story to an audience, it's not actually your story, it's their story. that you're entering into. We talk about the fact that there are one of three things that you should always be doing when you're opening a story. So whether this is a piece of marketing communication or whether it is a communication to a partner or a donor, you need to be thinking about, are you scaring them at the beginning? Are you showing the problem in some way, in a way that really startles them and brings them into it? Are you intriguing them, as that Barbie clip does? Are you reframing something in some way? Are you getting them to see it with a new perspective? Or are you inspiring them in some way? Are you painting some vision of the future or a possibility that they can really buy into? Powerful jeopardies can be big or they can be intimate. So as I said in some of those clips and examples, sometimes you can be showing the big picture. What does it mean for society? What does it mean for all of us? What do we all need to be thinking about? But the power of really subverting that sometimes with zooming in and showing one person's story, what it means for the individual, as adolescents did, really making it feel personal, relevant to me, something that could happen in my house. It means thinking about questions. It means really thinking about our audience's jeopardy. What is it that they care about? What will be challenging to convey to them? Who are their key stakeholders? Who do they think about? Like, is it their children? Is it other audiences? How can we play a role? And when is best to tell our story? Because we're going into their life. When and how is it going to be most immersive for them? So our first task, and we're going to give you just a few minutes to have some scribbles for this, and then we'll see if anyone wants to share or anything in the chat or otherwise. So I want you just to spend a few minutes thinking for the specific audience and the communication challenge that you chose to do this on. What's your audience's problem? What's the thing that they care most about? If you're entering their story, what's most important to them? So just a few minutes, and then we'll see if we can take some answers in the chat, or if anyone wants to raise a hand and quickly comment, we can do that. Okay, so we've got some great jeopardies coming through. I missed the what are we supposed to do right now? Okay, so you're supposed to be thinking about what is it that your audience cares most about for your specific audience that you're wanting to communicate to. What's the jeopardy for them? What's the opportunity or the thing that they're most scared about? So we've got extreme weather causing continual flooding events, heat waves, massive rainfall. Remember, it has to be relevant to your organization as well. So, you know, what's the thing that they care about that you will have a role in? Okay, people worried about losing their job, finding themselves homeless, kitchen table issues, getting an advanced degree, global warming, wanting to make a difference. Okay, brilliant. Right, so that's our start point, really thinking about what's the thing that personally matters to them and how are we linking our organisation to that. So we'll talk next about character building. So again, you are not the main character. We often think when we are communicating to audiences that it's all about us and it's all about our story. But again, we need to be thinking about the fact that we are a character in someone else's story. We're entering their life in some way. We like to use examples that everyone has seen. So it's very important that it is globally relevant. And we found for some reason that Friends is the one thing that works in every country that we work in. So we like to talk about roles when we talk about character, because it's, if you've identified that jeopardy for your audience, what's the thing that they really care about, they're worried about, what's going to intrigue, inspire or scare them? It's what role do you play in the face of that? So are you a unifier like Joey is? Are you someone who brings people together to make things happen? Are you a fixer like Monica, someone who really thinks around problems, cares about the details? Are you a challenger like Phoebe, who likes to poke at issues, and maybe you can do that with a bit of a smile and make it more acceptable? Are you a supporter like Chandler, somebody who's steadfastly there, but without sarcasm, never with sarcasm? Or are you an expert like Ross? Are you someone who has all the information and that's how you drive change? It's about being really clear about what our role is in the face of that jeopardy for our audience. We don't obviously say our role in communications. That's not how life works. We don't say we are an innovator or we're a fixer or any of those things. Our roles come to life through our backstory and our behaviors. So if we took Monica as an example again, as a fixer, we know that she used to hate how she looked. So she's become a people pleaser in her behaviors. We know that she's always been a bit of a control freak. So she's very highly organized. We know that she's had sibling rivalry with Ross. So it means that she's highly competitive. Our story and our role comes across through the things that we have done. So what have we achieved as an organization? Where else have we done things? Where else have we driven success? And then the behaviors, how do we show up? How do we talk? How do we behave? How are we coming to life in terms of our audience? When we're character building, we need to think about riding the elephant. So we talk about the fact that no one's ever really coming to an organization in this day and age with a blank sheet of paper in terms of their perception of you. They are most likely to have something that they think about you, and some of those things won't always be positive. So it's always worth thinking about, how do we make that either a positive, or how do we address it in some way? You can never just ignore it. So if we're making the negative a positive, for example, we are trying to get new donations and we are a very small organization in the not-for-profit space and we want people to hear about us. So how do we make that a positive? How do we show them that we are driving change in a different way? We're more agile in a new way, that we are more modern than the rest of the space? Or we mitigate it with transparency. We address it in some way and we give some information that shows why that negative isn't a negative. We reframe it. So our next exercise is going to be about how you build your character. So everything is connecting from that jeopardy. You've identified, oh, we've just got, sorry, I've just noticed in the chat, what if you're a Rachel? We always get this from Friends fans. So we don't have Rachel on there for one reason, two reasons. One, it's very nice to have 5 things on a slide and not 6. It's just a symmetry to it. But the most important reason is that Rachel's character changes throughout all of the series of Friends. She's almost the main character of the series, so she's quite hard to pin down. She's constantly changing and evolving. Anyway, your job now is to build your character. So you've identified that jeopardy, the thing that your audience cares about, and now you need to think, what role is your organization playing in that jeopardy? So I'll put these back up again. It doesn't have to be one of these roles. You can choose different words, but these are good examples of the fact that you can have a different role and come to life in a different way. You know, if you're a unifier, you'd be constantly showing how you're bringing people together. You might have more live events that bring people together. You might hero different voices in your space. If you're a challenger, you're going to come to life in a very different way in your communications. You're going to have things that are much more provocative. You're going to really push the boundaries when it comes to your narrative. So have a think now. It needs to be relevant to your jeopardy. Your role in your jeopardy need to kind of lean up against each other. What's the challenge that your audience has? And then how are you helping them solve that challenge or helping them grasp that opportunity? So again, have a few moments to think. And then you can put it in the chat. So we've got expert and unifier. Oh, I should have said that actually. It's really good that a couple of people have already identified too. Some of these need to lean up against each other. So if you're a challenger and you're always a challenger, sometimes that's not great, because sometimes you need to show that you've got solutions somewhere for people. So often you're a challenger and a fixer, or a challenger and a unifier. It's the problems come when you try to be all things to all people. When you're trying to be all of these roles, you start to feel confused to your audience. You're not clearly communicating. Lots of supporters and unifiers going alongside, fixer and supporter, unifier and supporter. So when you've got a bit more time, it's worth thinking, in the face of that jeopardy, how does that role come to life? So what is it in my backstory? Like, what have we done as an organization that supports that role? How do we show up in terms of our behaviors that show that role? Okay. So then we're going to go on to our last section, and this is story shapes. The reality is that all stories that you see, any film you see, any book you read, any podcast you listen to, any bit of communication is really based on common shapes. There are books about this if you really want to geek out about it. There's a number of different books. A brilliant one is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And they recognize that every single story over time had a hero's journey in some way. So if you were to watch Star Wars, if you were to watch Matrix, if you were to watch Harry Potter, they are all actually the same story structure. But obviously they come to life in very different ways, because the character is different, because the threads of the story within that are different. But the structure of what happens, a hero is challenged in some way, they go through a journey, they go through a number of different stages, they come to success at the end, is exactly the same. And we can use that to our benefit, because people like familiarity. They like to feel like they know where the story might end up. So there are 4 main shapes that we talk about. There's actually 7 in reality of all stories, but there are a number of these that don't necessarily work well in the space, particularly of social good. So, for example, just pure tragedy on its own, with no resolution and no action off the back of it, not brilliant. And also just pure comedy on its own, with no journey that people can go along, because comedy stories tend to just go in circles and you finish where you start. So the 4 that we have are rags to riches is the first one. So you imagine a story like Cinderella or Pretty Woman as great examples. So where someone starts from here and then they end up here and life is amazing. So these stories tend to be goal driven. They quite often have numbers attached to them or key milestones. So this is where we are now. This is where we want to get to. And these are the stages that we're going to go through to get there. So when you have a really firm target behind something, or something that people can get behind and have agency within, this is a great story type. The second is the quest. So this is when you're really illuminating a world that you want to create, when you're really having an end destination in mind and you're really bringing color to that destination. Imagine a world without, for example. So it's much more concept driven. It's about having a vision. It's about having ideas. And then again, there's a journey to get there, but it's less numbers and target oriented than the first example. We then have defeat the monster. So this is enemy driven. So it's what is that monster? So Jaws is a classic example, but the monster could be apathy. The monster could be we're in a certain state in the world. It's a scenario that we want to be. And what you're asking the audience to do is to come on that journey with you. So it's about what are the tools that we need? What are the weapons that we need to have in place? And then the last one is a rebirth story. So we were here, it was amazing, now we're here, and then this is how we get back here again. So again, it's a different type of journey. It's talking about coming back to a state of idealism. Any story we tell can fit into one of these. What we don't want to do is to think, okay, it's fitting somewhere between a quest and a bit of defeat the monster, because then we start using mixed messages and it's not very clear to our audience. And this is all about cutting through when we're doing storytelling. So again, I'll flick this back up in a second. And when we come to do the exercise, when we have a story, we want to think about the impact that we're creating. So what is the ending of our story? Where are we taking people at the end? But we have chapters along the way, and 3 is normally the magic number. There's a huge amount of science behind why in any kind of narrative, people can only really take in 3 big chunks of information. So if you're ever writing a presentation or whatever you're doing, really think about what are those big compelling bits of information and how you can group things together. If you find that you've got a presentation that feels like it's got 7 big bits of information, you are really like over-egging it. You really want to start streamlining down. Those 3s can work in different ways. It might be, this is where we are now, this is where we're going to next, this is the future. It might be, this is what we're doing at the heart of our organization. This is where we're stretching ourselves a little bit. This is where we're getting to new spaces. It might be that we're splitting things in 3 tactics of how we're doing things. This is what we're doing with donations. This is what we're doing with partnerships, etc. So the 3s can work in different ways, but 3s is how we want to think about things. Our chapters need to be the problems that are resolved in some way. So this is why this thing is important, and this is what we're doing to solve it. Because then the person who's following your story feels really comfortable as they're progressing. They feel and understand the challenges that you're facing and that you really have a handle on those challenges. Editing is really important in our story, and it's why using these storyboards is so useful, because it gets to the building blocks of our story. That's clearly not the final narrative of everything that we say in the story, but it enables us to think, have I thought about what the jeopardy is for my end audience? Have I thought about what role I'm playing? Have I thought about the ending for them and the impact that I'm creating? Have I thought about 3 big points? And have I thought about how I'm editing it? So make sure you're removing anything that isn't essential. If it's not highlighted in your storyboard in some way, if it doesn't have a clear goal in your story, it needs to come out. Quite often, the thing we're most attached to is the very thing that needs to come out of our communication. That is a tough lesson learned. So in your bit of communication, given that you've just had your jeopardy and you've been talking about what your character is, have a think about what kind of story is it? So what kind of story type is it? I'll put those back up. And just have a quick think about, are there three big points that I want to make in my story? Where am I ending up? We can have a go in a minute just to see if anyone does want to voice what their 1 minute pitch is, bringing all these things together. So I'll flash back up the story types, and we're going to give you 5 minutes this time to have a think about what's your story type, what are your three big points, and where are you ending up for people? It's very fast to do it, but you'll find actually doing these things at pace brings you quite a lot of clarity. So we're going to give you 5 minutes just to have a go, and then we'll see if anyone wants to stick their hand up and just say where they got to with their storyboard. We're also going to send this deck around afterwards, and I'll send you some links for our Substack that gives all of this detail that I've been talking about on there too, so you can go back to things and play with the concepts a bit. Lots of hearts for that, thank you. Is the jeopardy for the population our organisation serves or the audience we're talking to? Good question, really good question. Ultimately, you want to think about the audience that you're talking to, but you need to be mindful of what the jeopardy is for the population you serve within that as well. So it's most likely that when you're doing it, you need to start with something that your audience cares about, but one of your first chapters is likely to be reflecting the end audience that you serve. So you're having to do a little bit of both sometimes. Yeah, it is a balance. It's definitely a balance you have to play. It happens a lot of the time, though. We help people with investor stories, we help people with partnership stories. A really good example is actually when we did this with Alzheimer's recently, and they were pitching to a very big media owner in the UK. So, really, they're leaning into the jeopardy that for the big media owner, they want to know that they could sell papers. They want to know that the story is going to be relevant to their audience. That's the jeopardy. The thing that Alzheimer's Society are used to talking about is why Alzheimer's is the biggest killer in the UK. So they don't want to start with that because that's not actually the thing that this media owner cared about. The thing the media owner cares about is that Alzheimer's Society are capable of creating big stories that create big interest. And so that's what they needed to show from the beginning. But obviously, woven into their story somewhere, at some point, they're going to talk about the fact that Alzheimer's is the biggest killer in the UK, but they're not used to not leading with that. So it's quite a journey for them. But it was a real shift. They managed to get a really big media partnership as a result of making that kind of shift. Is everyone done? Is anyone ready? If you say in the chat that you fancy chatting through your story, we'd very much welcome it, and then we can call on you.
Looks like April is volunteering
Yeah.
to participate, Caroline. So let's bring her live, Kareem, if we can.
April, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for volunteering.
This is April, based in Chicago. I'm with Disability Lead. We're a professional organization for professionals with disabilities, and so we help them lead. And in our 2024 annual report, we call it our impact report. I linked it in the chat on page 7 if you want to follow along. Basically, we tell the story of Becky Brassfield. And Becky Brassfield is a member who was disabled as a result of being incarcerated and being removed from a PhD program. And it was quite a traumatic event for her. And we use a quest story type. So we kind of told her story from childhood to this traumatic event. And then we lead to how Disability Lead as an organization, recognizing her leadership potential, honing her leadership skills, exploring her disability identity, and empowering her. This was back in 2016, I'm sorry. And now she's a leader in her field as a researcher, and she's globally recognized for her research work, and she's published a couple books, and is well known in the social and emotional learning space. So we use the quest story type.
Amazing. Thank you. So on your story type, as an example, you could imagine having a really compelling jeopardy that leans into, some of the elephants in the room that you are most likely facing every day, like the perception that people with disabilities can't be amazing leaders for some reason, which would be ridiculous. There's things like that that you can lead with in jeopardy, and you can choose whether you intrigue, scare, or inspire up front. So I think it's brilliant what you've done with a personal story. It's brilliant. But I think, that's where you can play with it. The intrigue, inspire, or scare is a really good model because actually there is no perfect way to tell a story. Quite often you're playing with it and you're working out what will be compelling, what will make people lean in. Do we go more positive? Do we go more negative? These are all things. And actually using this tool, you can sketch it out really quickly and kind of go, okay, if we were choosing to start with something that just scared people, how would we do that? How would we lead? If we were choosing to inspire, how would we do that? If we were playing with this story type and doing it with a quest, how would it come to life? Or if we were doing it where we talk about destroying the monster and what you're talking about, you could have told that story in many different ways. So it's a really good way to kind of sketch it out and just think, for my audience, what's the most compelling way that will make them lean in? So I've taken you through quite a lot of information. And as I said, it was quick fire and it's really getting to grips with just the basic tools of storytelling. And I think sometimes they can get forgotten in the spaces that we're dealing with you as types of organizations, but also understanding it's not just about external marketing. It is about every time we're writing a presentation, every time we're writing an email, every time we're constructing a difficult conversation with someone, thinking about what does my audience care about first? How am I being really impactful with my ending? How am I taking them through a journey that might feel familiar? And how am I editing back? Is really key. Okay, we've got a question about the art. Can you talk about the strategy of leaving the ending unwritten and inviting the audience to help you create the desired ending, i.e. taking action for change? Yeah, so when we say ending written first, what we mean is having a really clear understanding of where you're taking your audience at the end. So it doesn't mean that you are saying ending first, as in you're revealing all at the beginning. But we do have a habit sometimes as storytellers in life of feeling like we should meander up to a big finish, as opposed to really that comment from Dan at the beginning, dessert or a punch for face, starting with something super impactful as well as finishing with something super impactful. So you can absolutely have a strategy where it feels like the audience is kind of co-writing with you and they're involved in the outcome, but you should be really clear about the outcome and you shouldn't leave all of the good stuff to the end of your story. And we do tend to do that as human beings. We're waiting for tears, applause, laughter. We're waiting for the big impact. And actually what we want to do is to hit people with that early and then to be impactful as we finish as well. Any other questions at all from anyone? Any guidance on how to use this to conceive and shape a social media campaign and storyboarding that? I've inherited a fairly reactive checkbox kind of social media function. I think what's really good for social media, I guess, is you can do a storyboard for almost your total social media strategy. So what are the big things that we always want to be talking about? And what are those pillars, therefore, in chapters? And what's the journey we want to always be taking them on? And then you can also do it for mini parts of your strategy. And those things that should obviously line up with each other. But you may well have, a jeopardy for different audiences and you need to land them all in the same social strategy. So I think it's good to map it at a broad level. And then we start to think about, at a platform level, does that differ from that broad level? At an audience level, does it differ from that broad level? And we start to tie them together. So we start quite broad and then we work bottom up and we tie the two. But again, it's a really good tool to use when you're thinking about a specific audience or a specific platform. That Pets United strategy was a really good one because they had an overall goal of their communication, but they appeared in quite a different way on Instagram where they knew that they wanted to lean into much more light-hearted, immersive series storytelling, and people were leaning into it almost like it was a reality TV series. But when they appeared on Facebook, their storytelling, although it was hitting some of the same notes and points, was much more personal, much more one person's story with their adoption. And so the same storyboard would have applied, but there would have been a slight difference as to that jeopardy and the way that people wanted to be engaged with. Can you use different story types within the same campaign? If you have clear stages of the story of the campaign, yes. And if they're appearing in different places, yes. I would say it gets more complicated and it might not necessarily feel as tied up. But for example, you might decide that you really want to be defeat the monster on your big impactful parts of your campaign, and that you want to follow up with something where it feels like people can have a real solution to the problem and that they feel like there is a quest that they can go on. So adolescence would have been a really good example of that, actually. So they had the show when it came out, and it was all about deep impact, real scare tactics, destroy the monster. Most definitely, it was all about, toxic kind of gendered roles in society. But then they had these really lovely vignettes where it showed the main male actors in the TV series going fishing together and talking about life and fatherhood and their sons and daughters. And it was lovely. And then they linked that much more to communication about how do you take your kids through this? How do you educate them? And so that is playing with different story types within the same campaign. How do you convince an organization's communication team to learn about new story building efforts? We take people through this kind of training all of the time who are incredibly experienced, very skeptical storytellers. And we always find that it gives them new ways of thinking about it. So I think sometimes it is about pulling together really great examples of where people are changing storytelling norms. Sometimes it is about proving impact to them. So we clearly show commercial impact from storytelling and things like that. Happy to have a separate chat with you in more detail about that if useful.